Hello, so today I thought I would discuss making bad art and not striving for perfection, which I'm still pretty new to, but I do think it has already helped me quite a bit. First thing first, I want to talk a little bit about context and then the importance of art for anybody. And then I'll go on to the part for the artists, starting with your lack of skills and then wanting everything to be perfect. Starting with context. When I started my sketchbook in 2019, I was very inspired by these sketchbooks that you would see on Pinterest that were always completely perfect, to the point where I felt like my sketchbook had to look that way as well. This is why my first pages of my sketchbook looked like this. You can sort of see what I was going for. Even though 2019 was a terrible year for me, having to make each spread perfectly cohesive and satisfying to look at was also a very big reason why I wasn't drawing at all and didn't feel the motivation to. It's only until very recently that I finally let myself use my sketchbook for what it is and let each page be its own thing independently from the others. This means that I wasn't restricting myself in what I was allowed to do, and art should never be restricted in my opinion. One of the reasons why I started letting myself be more open to making bad art was seeing a couple of videos on this subject which discussed how important it was to make bad art. One of them I cannot remember. It's so frustrating because it was really the main one that really motivated me. I cannot find it. But yeah, it was about making bad art and freeing yourself from these expectations that you might put onto yourself sometimes. Others are from Matthew Sorgi. I think he really shows you that your drawings don't have to be perfect to be good, and you can still have fun drawing things that you might not end up liking in the end. So do check him out. I have a few of his videos in the description so you can check them out afterwards if you want. But yeah, I think the process is practically just as important as the finished product, if not just as important. An example of this is when you're a kid. I remember when I was a child, I used to draw a lot and we didn't care about what it was going to look like in the end. It was about scribbling with all of these fun pencils and colours and pens on a piece of paper and just letting it all out on that sheet. And yes, maybe perhaps we would be always anticipating what our parents would think of it, but I still think it was very much based on the process and just scribbling, doing whatever we wanted on that piece of paper without worrying about what other people will think of it once it's finished or what you'll think of it. We didn't care whether we could draw an elephant or a house or not. We would just draw it without question, and this sort of unmatched confidence is something that we really lose when we grow up. Now we're just all extremely self-conscious of everything that we do, which is a real shame. But yeah, about making art as a general activity that everyone does when they're a child, I saw some things on Pinterest I thought were very interesting. This one that says that it's pretty shitty how baseline human activities like singing, dancing, and making art got turned into skills instead of being seen as behaviors. So now it's like the point of doing them is to get good at them and not this is a thing humans do the way birds sing and bees make hives. I know I've posted this before, but it bears repeating. This is a thing humans do. You don't have to be good at it to enjoy it. Another is from Kurt Vonnegut. I don't know how to say it, but this person says that go into the arts. I am not kidding. The arts are not a way to make a living. They are a very human way of making life more bearable. Practicing an art, no matter how well or badly, is a way to make your soul grow, for heaven's sake. Sing in the shower, dance to the radio, tell stories, write a poem to a friend, even a lousy poem. Do it as well as you possibly can. You will get an enormous reward. You will have created something. And then another, destroy the idea that you gotta be good at artistic things to enjoy them. That every hobby has to become something you're so good at you can monetize it. A capitalist lie. Sing off-key, draw poorly, write badly. Life is meant to be enjoyed, not monetized. You are not a product. Yeah, I love this quote so much, and it's kind of ironic since I want to make a living out of my art, but the basic idea here is that art in itself is so important and necessary to the point where you're allowed to make art to make yourself feel better, or as they said, as something that humans do, without making it a masterpiece. there are times when I'm feeling really down and I have no motivation whatsoever, so I make myself pick up a pen. It's usually fun things to work with, simply to make myself feel better. And most often in these cases, I hate what I end up doing or I don't really like, but the process is so calming that I don't care that it's bad because it's still fulfilled its purpose at making myself feel better. For example, I have 3 of them. The first one is this one, and this one I'm quite happy with it, I'm not gonna lie, but it was in September or August. It was just when I was going to start going to uni for the first time, and I was really stressed. And I know that when I draw people, I usually take the expression that I'm drawing. That's why I took this reference photo of someone who was smiling and happy, because I thought that if I was going to draw that, then my face was going to smile as well, which it did, and it made me feel a lot better. I felt productive as well, which is not necessarily the point of doing this, but it's also another thing that made me feel better. Another example is this one, and as you can see, it's not my best drawing. The proportions are completely off, which is why I mentioned that I messed up the eyes, but I still like it because I had fun doing it. It's not perfect. It's a thing that was done for a separate reason than being good and perfect. And the last example that I have is this one, which I was actually really scared of starting it because it was with felted pens and I was like, I don't know what I want to do. This is so scary, staring at a blank page, but I just thought about my childhood self that would scribble in pages and not care about it, so that's sort of what I did here. And I'm not gonna lie, I don't like it at all, but I don't need to like it. It doesn't need to be good. But yeah, I think we can all agree that art is so overlooked in general. After a certain point in school, people who do not want to continue maths, science, physics, whatever, these sort of scientific subjects, people who don't want to continue them are forced to sit through classes of them, while people who want to pursue these subjects are not made to carry on the arts and music, which I would argue that the arts are way more important than science, because to me these subjects are useless to most people and you tend to completely forget about them a couple years later or even just a few months later, while the arts to me are very important mentally. I get really annoyed about that because I just think it's very wrong to let these subjects be more important than the other when they are absolutely not valuable at all to most people who do not want to pursue them. But anyway, you get my point. This is something that Robin Williams perfectly says in The Dead Poets Society, which if you haven't watched that film, I really recommend it. But in that film he says that we don't read and write poetry because it's cute. We read and write poetry because we are members of the human race, and the human race is filled with passion. Medicine, law, business, engineering, these are noble pursuits and necessary to sustain life. But poetry, beauty, romance, love, these are what we stay alive for. And this is why I think it's so important to let yourself make art for the sake of just doing it. Not for its product, not for how great it's going to turn out or not, but for its process and therefore its positive consequence on your well-being. Art is supposed to be therapeutic and calming, but it is different for those who want to turn it into their job, because obviously there's a added duty and added pressure for them, which I am a part of, especially with needing to put yourself out there on social media and attract followers. If you bring all of these expectations, then you're going to feel really discouraged when you don't reach them. And there's nothing worse than going to a piece and not being able to nail it, or not being able to put on paper what your mind has concocted, and then being disappointed in yourself and never wanting to pick up a pen ever again. Which is why I thought it was important for me to talk about being okay with being bad at art and not striving for perfection at least all of the time. So I'm going to dissect this into different categories with different tips, starting with your lack of skills. First of all, one of the reasons why you might not be as great as you would like to be, and therefore think or consider that you are bad at art, is your lack of skills. I completely relate to this. I am terrible in quite a few things, especially perspective. I hate perspective. It's so annoying. I really need to work at it, but yeah, it's a very frustrating thing to deal with, but everyone does. if that's any comfort to you. Even though some people are talented from practically the moment they started drawing at a very young age, it's still a very, very minor occurrence. Barely anyone is in that case, so I can confidently say that most people, if not everyone, have to work at it, and when they start drawing, they do it pretty badly. It's completely okay. We've all been there. It's universal, so don't beat yourself up for it if that's your case. It's actually something that's so weird to me because I feel like when we start, we all draw exactly the same way, whether it's the manga phase, the bad art phase. Like, I have seen some artists' really old drawings and thought, wow, I drew exactly the same way, and I don't know, I find it so weird. But yeah, we all went through the manga phase and the bad drawing phase. That's just the way it is. It's just your imagination not quite matching your skills yet. You have to draw and practice to hopefully one day get to a level in art that corresponds to your imagination. I do think that even really skilled artists that we might look up to on Instagram still look at their work with a lot of criticism and still see a huge room for improvement. And I think we'll always try to better ourselves and our art. You will always think that there's something that you can improve on. You're never going to be 100% happy or satisfied with your art. And I'm telling you this so you don't look forward to that time in the future where you will be 100% satisfied with your art, because you are just never going to get there. You'll always have bad art days where you won't like your art as much as another day, or days where you feel like you just completely suck, or like you've completely forgotten everything that you've ever learned in art. And it's annoying and frustrating, but it happens to even the best of us. I'm saying this to remind you to focus on where you are now and figure things as you go, because you won't be able to escape the bad art occurrence, which is why it's so critical that you accept the fact that you will have those days. Even people you look up to, whom you think constantly make absolutely gorgeous pieces, deal with this issue. An example of that is on Instagram. You might know her. She's called Lord Gris, an extremely skilled and successful artist who also deals with that, actually shares her experiences with it a lot. She does give tips on how to deal with this frustration and disappointment of making bad art that you are unsatisfied with, which I'm going to mention now. Sometimes if I'm feeling really out of practice with art because I haven't drawn in a while, I find that redrawing an old drawing is really helpful. You don't have to stress about coming up with a new idea, you just expand upon something that you've already done. It's good for technical practice. That being said, I really struggled with this one. It was hard to keep drawing because I felt like I was doing a bad job. When I feel like that, even though it feels counterintuitive, I try to power through the drawing anyway, because I know even if I hate the drawing, at the end I can still say I finished it. As artists, I think it's really easy to be down on ourselves about everything from our skills to our ideas, and it snowballs. The more you rail on yourself, the harder it is to motivate to create. Now, finishing art is another way we beat ourselves up. Look at me, I'm so terrible, I never finish anything. So even if I hate the drawing, I try to finish it anyway. It's a small win, I guess. In the same way some of those self-help books say to start your day making your bed, not because you need to, but because doing it makes you feel productive. It's a small win that can snowball into bigger wins. Plus, when you struggle through art, even if you make a bad piece that you can't share, you still learn a lot. So it's not wasted time at all. If you can sit in that discomfort of failure, it's a great opportunity to grow as an artist. Often embracing failure is one of the most important aspects of creating that we're never taught. If you've been having a rough time lately, just know it means you're growing and learning. If you can sit and create through that feeling, you're going to do great things, I promise. And another one which I thought was very interesting was this one, where she says, I've been in a bit of a drawing slump lately. I've had a hard time drawing. I have all of these ideas, but I don't quite have the skills for it yet, so everything has ended up in the trash. It's really discouraging, but I know it's part of the artistic circle. When I get frustrated about this sometimes, a practice I like to do is redraw an old piece of art. It's relaxing because I don't have to create a new concept or pose, and I get to apply all these new things I have learned to see how I've improved. Normally I'll do pieces from when I was significantly younger, but I decided to try a fairly recent piece to see how my art has changed in the last 2 years. I think I've learned a bit about precision and movement since I've made the original piece, and I'm happy about that. It's nice to see because I think we as artists are always plagued with this paranoid idea that we are possibly getting worse. It can be sort of paralyzing, but I'd honestly recommend this practice to all of you. I know art block is a huge problem in the community, and sometimes you just need a bit of encouragement to see that progress is indeed happening. Progress can be slow, so you may not even notice it, but it's there. I didn't do anything crazy to grow. I didn't go to school or watch tutorials. I just struggled through a lot of bad art and learned things through the process. Anyway, I'm happy this fixed my art block and I can keep making cute pieces to share with you guys. Try redrawing some of your art. I think you'll have fun with it. So as you can see, she is a great example of someone you might think doesn't deal with this issue, but actually does. And you might think that she has all of the skills she could possibly need, but every artist has something to work on. So don't ever feel like you're completely alone dealing with them, and reaching to the artists that you follow could be a great thing for you. But yeah, it's completely normal to make bad art or to make art that you might think is bad for lack of skills. Another thing that I saw this time was on TikTok, and it was this video of a transgender woman making a makeup process, and her caption was "Sucking at something is the first step to being sort of good at something." And that's completely true. We all have to start somewhere. Even if your batterings are bad when you begin, they are necessary for you to get better. But yeah, going back to practicing, it's a very proclaimed thing to do, and you'll see many people telling you that practicing every day is the only way to get better. And I'm not going to disagree with this completely, because I don't feel like I'm good enough of an artist to admit that I know better. However, I do think it's important to listen to how you're feeling, and yes, it is important to push yourself. I still think that drawing when you want to is perfectly okay. Personally, I don't practice ever. Every year I tell myself as a New Year resolution that I will, but then I don't because it doesn't interest me at all. I just draw when I want to, and I think that works well for me. I'm sure it does for a lot of people too. I quickly saw Temi Danso Art's video on useless art advice I'm tired of hearing, and that practicing every day as the only way to get better advice was one of them. And I completely agree, because not everyone has the time to, not everyone has the motivation to, and it can feel pretty disappointing and discouraging to hear that when you're not doing it, because you feel that you won't ever be able to get better if you don't follow that advice, which is not true at all. Obviously, you can't expect yourself to improve as quickly as someone who practices every day or someone who draws way more than you do, but at the end of the day, art is supposed to be fun. And it's supposed to be something that you enjoy doing. And in my opinion, that rule can really stop you from enjoying it altogether, so that's probably why most people hate it and don't really recommend. But this is also why you can't compare yourself to other people, especially in a negative way, because there are so many different factors that come into play, like how many times you've drawn, since when have you started drawing, and so each artist's experience with art is completely different. Your journey is yours, and it might take longer than most people or someone else that you know to see an evolution in your art style, for example, but some people do pick up learning way faster than other people, and that's just the way it is. Just focus on yourself, just give yourself and your art time to grow. I will delve into finding your art style in a future video similar to this one, so if you want to watch that, then stay tuned. A really interesting video on this practicing subject that I really recommend you checking out after this video is from Mew Tripled, and it's titled "Why Your Art Is Not Improving, Practice Doesn't Make Perfect." In this video, she mentions that practicing can end up with you creating bad habits while drawing and practicing the same thing over and over again, because you might be practicing the wrong way to the point where you end up creating extremely bad habits. So what's actually important is to learn to be diverse in what you're capable of drawing and not constantly draw hands, for example, but try experimenting with animals and landscapes, etc., etc. Which is why drawing when you want to is, for me at least, something that lets me do that. I do usually draw people, but if I feel inspired by nature one day, then I'll draw something of the kind, like a bird, for example. She does touch upon practicing in a good way, so I really recommend checking that video for that reason, because she has really interesting insights about this topic that I do not have because I am not experienced enough to have. She really does go way more in full detail about practicing, and it's a great video. The comments also have interesting takes on this. So yeah, you might see artists that you follow on Instagram who blew your mind with how much of a difference there was between their art in 2017 and 2021, for example, which you can see with art comparisons that they do sometimes. And those art comparisons can either be extremely motivating and inspiring, or it can make you feel pretty underwhelmed with how much these artists improved while you feel stuck in this bad art phase. Also, no hate to Marine the Drawer. She is an incredibly skilled artist that really inspires me. I just use examples from her art because I've just never seen any other artist improve as quickly as she has and as drastically as she has. Don't know how she does it, it's incredible. So yeah, no hate to her, it's just the most drastic examples that I could find from the people that I follow. So yeah, for that, your skills or lack of have a lot to answer for. And it can feel really frustrating to move at such a slow pace when it comes to improving, especially when you see other artists change in a single year. Which is why I recommend looking at Lorde Griss's art journey on Instagram that she has highlighted, because it's a very interesting thing to read about and it's extremely inspiring as well, I think, since she actually stopped drawing altogether from when she was 19-year-old to 23. She did practice drawing every day after that, but it just shows that every person has their own pace and it's okay to take a break, to not draw regularly, etc. As we've seen with her and the previous examples, personal art comparisons are very important in staying motivated. Which brings me to my next tip, which is to see your art and your drawings as a necessary step to getting better at art, no matter how bad you view it. All of your drawings are learning experiences. You learn so much from drawing, no matter how great or badly it turns out. This is a very good example of that, good example of why using references is very important. But here I drew this pretty bad, ugly eye, and now I know for next time that the pupil needs to be more sunken in the eye and that there's no clear separation where there's the nose and the eyebrow is supposed to be a little more stood out. But yeah, you can sort of compare your bad drawing to a photo reference, for example, if you haven't used one, to see what went wrong and note these mistakes that you made in your head so you know better for next time. This brings me to another tip, which is that when I go into a drawing or when I look back at a drawing that after finishing it I don't like it at all and it doesn't turn out the way I wanted it to, I see it as a really great source material for a redraw after a few years once I'll improve, and therefore as a really great Instagram art comparison post. This is such a positive and realistic way of seeing it, and I think it could maybe really help you to see it that way too, especially because the worse it turns out, the better source material it will be, which sort of encourages the idea of making bad art or letting yourself draw things that are imperfect and full of mistakes, obviously here not on purpose. For example, I have this before and after comparison of a side profile that I drew without references in 2020 and 2021. The first one was actually something that I made to try out these new markers that I bought, and straight away when I did it I really didn't like it. It felt really flat and didn't look proportional. And then the second one I did pretty recently actually, and I like way more. I really like the way I colored it. It's still not perfect. You can see that the nose is too sunken in compared to the forehead, which I know now for next time. I think it's a great comparison, and if I hadn't drawn the first one or if I had just thrown that one, I wouldn't have gotten to see the improvement that I've made in a year. I think it's a great example of making bad art and letting yourself be bad at it for the sake of your future self to look back on. Another one is this one, which I know it's unfinished, but at first when I started it and I saw that I couldn't quite capture what I had in mind, I was a little discouraged. But then now when I look at it, even though I still think it's bad, I think, it's going to be useful for my future self when I'll redraw it. Because even though it doesn't look like I wanted it to, I have a clear idea of what I was trying to go for. I have a clear idea of the composition, what I was trying to put on paper basically. It's a cool drawing that will be fun to redraw when I'll have the skills that I did not have when I drew this, making a great fun comparison in the future. This therefore allows to do what Lorde Griss recommended. But logically, this thought is only possible if you already believe and do know that you are going to improve, which you will, everyone does. You're not going to fall through the cracks and be the only one who does not improve. No matter how unlucky you are going to improve. You are. And what you're making right now, which you might think is bad, is going to come in handy later for your future selves, for redraw, art comparisons, etc. So honestly, just embrace it. Let it be its thing. Let yourself make bad art if that's all you know how to do for now. It's going to get better, and it will only motivate you more if you see a before after in your art, no matter how little it is. Think about your bad art as a great source material, but also be patient. Don't constantly look back on drawings that you've made not too long ago, searching for improvement. Don't expect yourself to leave the bad art phase so quickly, because at the end of the day, we all end up there every once in a while. There's always going to be moments where what you make is bad. This is why, as I've said previously, it's super important to let yourself make it without judging yourself too hard and stopping yourself from always wanting everything to be perfect, because it's really going to slow you down. And that brings me to my next point, which is wanting to make everything perfect. As I've said before with the mention of my sketchbook in 2019, I felt obliged to always make something absolutely amazing and perfect. And a few things that helped me was first realizing that, except for if you're doing commissions, your drawings don't have to look exactly like the reference photo that you're using. I mentioned commissions because obviously with them you are paid to draw as closely as you can to the photo that you're given. For example, my sister asked me to draw her, so yeah, obviously I need to make sure that it's recognizable, that it looks like her, which is why I sketched it first and made sure to have each feature look like her, basically, so she can be recognizable in the final drawing. But apart from commissions and maybe fan art as well, your drawings, especially practice drawings, don't need to be perfect in that way. And even for them, most things are recognizable way before they're drawn hyper realistically. For example, with these ones, they are not drawn hyper realistically and they're still recognizable. You can still tell who these people are if you know them because of certain characteristics that are trademarks. But yeah, I think it's absolutely amazing that the brain can identify that something is what it is simply by the shape that it takes or because of a few specific characteristics. And many art movements are based on that, such as Impressionism. According to this source, Impressionism is perhaps the most important movement in the whole of modern painting. At some point in the 1860s, a group of young artists decided to paint, very simply, what they saw, thought, and felt. They weren't interested in painting history, mythology, or the lives of great men, and they didn't seek perfection in visual appearances. Instead, as their name suggests, the Impressionists tried to get down on canvas an impression of how a landscape, thing, or person appeared to them at a certain moment in time. This often meant using much lighter and looser brush work than painters had up until that point, and painting out of doors en plein air. The Impressionists also rejected official exhibitions and painting competitions set up by the French government, instead organizing their own group exhibitions, which the public were initially very hostile to. All of these moves predicted the emergence of modern art and the whole associated philosophy of the avant-garde. The main ideas of Impressionism was to use looser brush work and lighter colors than previous artists, as mentioned previously. They rejected the clarity of form that previously served to distinguish the most important elements of a picture from the lesser ones. Their art did not necessarily rely on realistic depictions. They aimed to extend the possible subjects for paintings, getting away from depictions of idealized forms and perfect symmetry. They concentrated on the world as they saw it, which was imperfect in a myriad of ways. There's a lot of mentions of imperfection as their inspiration. Personally, this art movement reminds me of two artists that I follow on Instagram. The first one being Not So Art, where she does have pretty realistic pieces, but overall it's pretty loose and not perfectly detailed or outlined. And there's also Rizzo Shan, which I admire a lot when it comes to the colors that she uses. I think her art is gorgeous, and obviously you can see in those pieces that they're not perfect. Another art movement that is based on interpretation more or less is Cubism, which is very focused on shapes and sharp lines. Something that I really enjoy experimenting with, seeing faces as a combination of geometric shapes. This is something you can find in Theo Banoff's art, which I found so cool. It's not quite like Cubism, but there's like all sorts of shapes that you can find in his pieces. But yeah, you don't need everything to be perfect to be considered art. It doesn't need to be completely coloured in to be absolutely beautiful or represented. Some artists' style are a lot looser, which means that some people's features that are drawn are not perfect at all, but that doesn't make the piece any less admirable, liked, inspiring, or recognizable. Imperfection in art doesn't take away from the piece. Examples for this are Matthew Sorgi, for example, with this piece where you can totally tell who this is and where it's from, even though it's not drawn hyper-realistically, or like I mentioned earlier, Black Beans CMS. And maybe that's not something that you're into if your style is more a realistic one, but it's a choice that some people make. So if you happen to have an eye that is bigger than the other one, don't beat yourself up for it because 1, mistakes happen, 2, you'll know better for next time, 3, even though you'd rather not have that in your art, some people choose to draw that way and others admire them for that. So most people won't care if it looks wrong, if that's what worries you. Roll with it and don't take it too seriously. And 4, you are drawing real people, or humans in general, and humans are not perfect at all. A huge amount of people have asymmetrical faces. They have an eyebrow that is higher than the other one, they have crooked noses, so drawing them that way is also perfectly acceptable, whether it was intentional or not. I have an eyebrow that is higher than the other one, so sometimes when I draw and I mean to make both eyebrows look perfectly symmetrical and identical and they don't end up looking like that way, I know that I'll try better next time to be more aligned with my intentions, and that this drawing doesn't look any different or less good simply because that part is not perfect. Because technically, I meant to draw someone and I did. An example of your intentions not being completely reached in a drawing is this drawing that I made where it was supposed to portray a disgusted expression, and when I drew it, I realized that it didn't quite look like a disgusted expression, more of a sort of sad, confused one. This taught me that if you want to draw the disgust expression, then the eyebrow needs to be furrowed like it would be with anger, so facing downwards instead of going up. Lessons learned. So yeah, even though you intended it to look differently, it's all a learning process, and as I've said before, you have to see it as a necessary step to getting better. Learn along the way, especially from your mistakes. It still looks good, and even if it didn't, I had loads of fun doing it, so... Another tip that I have for putting less pressure on yourself when it comes to striving for perfection is using felt tip pens and other permanent markers instead of using a pencil and rubber. Why, you may ask? Well, because 1, it's way more fun, in my opinion anyway, since you're spending way less time sketching, trying to make that first step perfect, and more time having fun with colouring, which I love to experiment. I love using colours in my art, and so getting to spend more time in that step or going straight away in it is just way more fun for me. 2, you have an excuse for when you mess up or when it doesn't turn out perfectly. Since the final doesn't look exactly like the reference photo you used, you can just tell yourself that, of course it didn't turn out perfectly or turn out as great as it could have done if I had tried properly sketching it with a pencil, since I went straight in with permanent unerasable pens. Yeah, whenever I finish a drawing and I see a few mistakes, I'm like, yeah, well, no, I can't expect the same results as if I had done it with something that I could erase. It's a good excuse for me, in my opinion, and it lets you accept what it is. So you have way less pressure and reinforces the idea that you're drawing for fun. And the third reason why I think using permanent markers like highlighters and stuff is I feel like you go straight, you just prioritize what's important. You don't get lost in the details. I don't know how to explain this. You just become more comfortable simply drawing and you start to not take yourself so seriously or what you're doing so seriously. I had an old TikTok where I could not commit to using a pen in my sketchbook because it was just too much. It was too permanent and I didn't want to make any mistakes and in case I messed up. And there's something about not being able to erase your mistakes and therefore having to deal with them that after a while makes you see them as not such a big deal. The more you create these pieces with permanent markers, the more you realize that the mistakes don't take away from the fun that you had while drawing. They're there, but that's it. Especially if you end up liking what you did, then you realize that you did make mistakes along the way, but you still ended up liking it, so that's fine. And even if you didn't, then it didn't, as I've said before, didn't take away from the fun that you had, or I don't know, you just learn to accept them and that they're there and that they're always going to be there. Like Bug Boss would say, they're just happy accidents that help you in your next piece. Moral of the story: art doesn't need to be good when it's meant to make you feel better or calm your emotions. Making bad art means learning, so see your bad art as a necessary step and a great basis for your future self to work with or look back on with art comparisons, for example. Most people, if not everyone, aren't perfect and have imperfections that make them who they are. I would not be me if it wasn't for my extremely asymmetrical face, my crooked nose, my gummy smile. So yeah, even though it may not be your intention, it's okay to draw incorrect features. You can work on being better with your intentions later. If you don't like what you've done, then finishing it will at least satisfy you in that way. What you might beat yourself up for in your art are sometimes things that artists intend to do in their art. So don't take yourself or your art too seriously, which I know is more easily said than done, but I just want to remind you that art is supposed to be fun. So work on getting closer to your intentions, but don't beat yourself up if you don't manage to. You'll do better next time. You're still allowed to get frustrated or unmotivated or get a art block. That happens, but just let yourself make those mistakes. Fix them if you can, learn from them if you can't. But yeah, I think I've said all that I've wanted to say. I feel like this turned into me recommending artists, but each person I mentioned will have their Instagram account linked in the description. I hope this was somewhat helpful, maybe not. I always find it difficult to put into words stuff like that in a helpful way, because I do think that each person's experience with art and with all sorts of other things, such as expectations that they put on themselves, their relation to perfection, are all very personal. And because everything is so different, one person and the other, it's tricky to give, in my opinion, good advice that works for everyone or for a lot of people when I'm talking about my experience and what has helped me, which might not help someone who has even just a harder perception of themselves. So at least I tried, but if there's anything that you'd like me to touch upon a bit that has to do with today's topic, such as insecurities, doubts that you may have, or even just insight on this subject, then definitely leave them in the comments. I will definitely try to answer them as best as I can. Leave any thoughts you have in the comments. I would love to read about them. I hope this was helpful. Probably do a how I draw faces in the future, if it helps anyone. I still don't quite know if I have figured it out, but that's probably a video that we'll be doing in the future, so if that's something you're interested in, then stay tuned. Otherwise, I'll see you soon, and yeah, bye! I never felt so alone, it felt so alone, no.